When ADHD first started being defined and discussed, we thought it was all about kids. Actually, we thought it was all about boys. Hyperactive, jump out of your seat boys. But over time, we started to realize that the brain difference that was causing those boys to jump out of their seat and run a mile a minute actually stayed with them throughout their whole lives. Then, the more we looked into it, the more we saw. It's not just about your body running all around, it's also about your mind running around too. Once we realized that, it was like the whole world of psychology research started to wake up, and they started to see, oh hey, this brain difference? Girls and women have it too. But the truth is, when it comes to really understanding ADHD in girls and women, we're pretty far behind what we know about boys. Most of what we do know is extrapolated from what we know about boys, combined with individual reports rather than large-scale research studies on women and girls alone. But research is rapidly trying to catch up, so let's check out what we've learned so far. Boys are 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD as girls. But as time passes and girls become women and they start to be able to identify what feels different about their own brains and seek answers themselves, this number drops to only twice as likely. This is more even for sure, but it still means that more men are diagnosed than women. Why is that? Well, there are a variety of factors for why that might be. The first is called the female protective effect. This threshold hypothesis states that perhaps there's something about being born female that actually keeps you from developing an ADHD brain. In fact, it states that female embryos would need to be exposed to greater amounts of biological and environmental risk factors to develop ADHD. And there's some solid evidence to support this. But if this were the only thing keeping the numbers so starkly different between men and women, the rates of women being diagnosed with ADHD wouldn't be continually rising as they are. So what else keeps girls and women from being diagnosed? Well, that brings us to our second reason, bias. You see, we all have a bias for what we think ADHD is, and that includes researchers and clinicians. We still think of ADHD as hyperactive boys bouncing out of their seats. We think of kids that can't control their impulses and kids that are constantly distracted. So we look out for that and we listen for that. But the way that a lot of women and girls experience their ADHD brains is different, and so we don't see their symptoms for what they truly are. That brings us to the next reason ADHD is diagnosed less frequently in girls and women. Often, because ADHD looks different in girls and women, it's diagnosed as something different. Things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or borderline personality disorder. Sure, sometimes those things are there too, but an ADHD brain, that's fundamental. That's primary. Oftentimes, those other disorders are in reaction to living in a world not well suited for your unique brain. But it's not just other disorders that we explain away symptoms of girls and women with. It's also their personality. Women and girls are more likely to be characterized by their symptoms. They're called spacey, or chatty, or ditzy, or over-emotional. So rather than suggesting help or identification, girls are given a personality label, which often follows them for a lifetime. The final thing that keeps girls and women from being diagnosed: the squeaky wheel effect. Girls and women with ADHD are more likely to be inattentive. They're more likely to feel guilt and shame and internalize their struggle. If they act out, they usually act out on themselves through self-harm, addiction, or other self-punishing behaviors. These things are intensely painful on the inside, but can go for years without being noticed on the outside. But boys, they're more likely to be squeaky. They're more likely to be hyperactive, to be impulsive, and to act out in a way that's obvious and challenging to others. So in a classroom full of kids, who's going to get the attention? The boy bouncing off the walls, or the girls staring out the window at the back of the class? So if girls aren't as likely to fit our standard conception of ADHD, Then what does it look like? Well, girls and women are more likely to have an inattentive type of ADHD. They may appear withdrawn. They're likely to daydream and struggle to remain focused. They may cry easily and feel like their emotions are out of control. They can be disorganized and messy and prone to mistakes. They may not seem motivated and are often forgetful. Often girls and women with ADHD are hypersensitive to noises, fabrics, and lights, but also emotions, body language, and injustice. They may be hypertalkative and may interrupt people while talking, but they may also be shy and withdrawn, struggling to fit in, or process information around them as quickly as others expect. Women with ADHD often struggle with time management and have a hard time completing tasks, instead shifting from one task to another. In childhood, these symptoms are often covered over by parents, people-pleasing, intelligence, or they're just explained away. As adults, however, these symptoms often leave women feeling out of control and deep, intense shame over what feel like personal failings. But ADHD isn't about personality. It's not about willpower or moral failings. ADHD is a neurobiological, structural difference in your brain, which at its most simplified is about a neurotransmitter deficiency in the prefrontal cortex. And you know what makes that neurotransmitter deficiency even more inconsistent and more difficult? Estrogen. Yep, as if this whole picture weren't messy enough, a woman's changing hormone levels change her symptoms both throughout the course of a month, but also over the course of her lifetime. Want to know how? Stay tuned for my next video where we'll dive deep into the link between hormones and ADHD.